Hey dreamers and knowledge seekers, welcome back to Dreamer Space.
Dreamer Space.
This is the channel where we dive deep into fascinating topics.
That's right.
And today, we're going full-on strategist.
Buckle up.
We're about to unlock ancient secrets of military genius, secrets that are still relevant today.
That's right. Buckle up, because we're about to journey back in time to ancient China, exploring the intricate strategies and philosophies laid out in a text that has influenced military thinking for centuries.
You've brought us a collection of excerpts from an intriguing source, a book that delves into Chinese military strategy. Let's unpack what we can learn from this.
Absolutely. These excerpts seem to be from a book that analyzes the teachings of Sun Tzu's The Art of War, a masterpiece of military strategy.
Right.
Even though it was written centuries ago, its wisdom still resonates in the boardroom, on the battlefield, and even in our everyday lives.
I am so ready for this. Let's talk Sun Tzu.
Okay.
Give us the background.
So before we dive into the specifics, it's important to understand a bit about Sun Tzu himself. Now, not much is known for sure about him. Historians even debate whether he was a real person or a product of legend.
Intriguing. So it's like a historical mystery wrapped in a military treatise. Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more.
Exactly. But what we do have is The Art of War, and this text is packed with insightful advice on everything from planning and deception to logistics and leadership.
Okay, so we've got this mysterious figure, Sun Tzu, and his legendary work, The Art of War. You've been digging through these excerpts. What are some of the key takeaways that have jumped out at you? What's the stuff that's going to make our listeners go, whoa, I never thought about it like that before?
One of the biggest takeaways, and this is a constant theme throughout Sun Tzu's work, is the sheer importance of planning and deception. He believed that victory is often secured before the battle even begins.
So it's not just about brute force. It's about outsmarting your opponent before you even step onto the battlefield.
Precisely. Sun Tzu stresses meticulous planning, analyzing the terrain, knowing your enemy as well as you know yourself, and using deception to gain a strategic advantage. He believed that by the time the first arrow flies, a true strategist has already mapped out the path to victory.
That's amazing. But how does that translate to something like, say, a business negotiation or even just dealing with everyday conflicts? I mean, I'm not planning any military campaigns anytime soon.
That's the beauty of Sun Tzu's work. It's not just about warfare, it's about understanding the dynamics of conflict in any situation. Think of a job interview. You wouldn't go in blind, would you?
Definitely not.
You'd research the company, prepare your answers, and try to anticipate the interviewer's questions. That's Sun Tzu in action.
That's such a good point. You're essentially gathering intelligence, strategizing your approach, and even using a bit of deception by presenting your best self. It's like Sun Tzu is whispering in your ear, know your battlefield, even if it's a conference room.
Exactly. And this leads us to another one of Sun Tzu's key principles, adaptability. He famously compared military tactics to water, constantly flowing and adapting to the terrain.
I love that analogy. So even with all the planning in the world, you have to be ready to adjust your strategy on the fly. No rigid plans.
Right. Clinging to a rigid plan when the situation is changing is a recipe for disaster, according to Sun Tzu. A skilled strategist, whether they're a general or a CEO, needs to be able to read the situation, anticipate challenges, and adapt their approach to ensure victory.
That's such a valuable lesson for, well, life in general, isn't it?
Absolutely. We all face unexpected challenges, setbacks, and opportunities. Sun Tzu reminds us that it's not about sticking to a rigid plan, but about being flexible, resourceful, and ready to adapt to the ever-changing landscape.
Okay, so we've got planning, deception, adaptability. It's like Sun Tzu is building a blueprint for strategic thinking, brick by brick. What else did he emphasize?
Here's where it gets really interesting. Sun Tzu recognized the psychological aspect of conflict, the mental game, centuries before it became a mainstream idea.
So it's not just about moving troops around a board, it's about understanding and manipulating your opponent's mind. That's some next-level stuff.
He knew that morale, fear, doubt, these were just as powerful as any weapon.
Oh, absolutely.
A skilled strategist, according to Sun Tzu, uses these emotions to their advantage, demoralizing the enemy and bolstering their own troops' confidence. He even suggests sowing discord among the enemy ranks, turning their strengths into weaknesses. He's playing 4D chess while everyone else is stuck on checkers.
Okay, I have to admit, I'm completely hooked now. Give me a concrete example of this psychological warfare in action.
Imagine this. You're a general facing an army twice the size of yours. Your soldiers are outnumbered, demoralized, ready to bolt. What do you do?
Honestly, I'd probably panic. Sun Tzu probably wouldn't recommend that strategy, would he?
Not exactly. Sun Tzu would tell you to create the illusion of strength even where it doesn't exist. He gives the example of a general who, when facing a larger force, ordered his troops to build huge campfires at night, far more than their numbers would suggest.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What happened?
The enemy, seeing these blazing fires from a distance, assumed their opponents were a vast and mighty force. Their morale plummeted, fear crept in, and they chose to retreat rather than face this phantom army. The general, without ever engaging in a single battle, secured victory through pure psychological brilliance.
Wow. It's like he turned fear, which could have crippled his own army, into a weapon against the enemy. That's some seriously masterful manipulation.
Exactly. And that story highlights another crucial element of Sun Tzu's thinking, the strategic use of terrain.
Okay, terrain. He talks a lot about mountains, rivers, valleys, almost like they're characters in the battle themselves. What's the significance of that?
Sun Tzu dedicates a surprising amount of the art of war to understanding how the landscape can be your greatest ally or your downfall. He teaches us to read the terrain, to understand its advantages and disadvantages, its choke points and hidden pathways.
So it's like he's saying that a skilled strategist doesn't just fight on the battlefield, they use the battlefield itself as a weapon.
Precisely. For example, he talks about the different types of terrain: accessible ground, entangling ground, temporizing ground. Each one requires a different approach, a different set of tactics.
Hold on, break that down for me. What's the difference between, say, accessible ground and entangling ground?
Imagine a vast, open plain. That's your accessible ground. It favors open warfare, swift maneuvers, direct confrontations. Now imagine a dense forest or a narrow mountain pass. That's your entangling ground. It's treacherous, it slows you down, makes you vulnerable to ambushes. Sun Tzu would tell you to avoid this type of terrain, unless you're planning to lay a trap for your enemy.
It's like choosing your battleground strategically. You wouldn't want to bring a sword to a gunfight or fight on terrain that gives your opponent the upper hand.
Exactly. It's about playing to your strengths and exploiting your enemy's weaknesses, and that includes the ground you fight on. And then you have temporizing ground, which is all about delaying the enemy, buying yourself time to regroup or retreat.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all of these principles weave together. You need to plan, but be adaptable. You need to understand your enemy, but also master the terrain. It's like a giant strategic puzzle.
And let's not forget the spies. Sun Tzu believed that no strategic campaign is complete without a network of informants. He even categorized them local spies, inward spies, converted spies, expendable spies, each one playing a specific role in gathering intelligence.
Okay, this is where it gets really cloak and dagger. Spies, like actual secret agents. How did Sun Tzu think about using them?
Think of it this way. Information is power, even, or maybe especially in ancient warfare. Sun Tzu argued that you need to know your enemy's movements, their strengths, their weaknesses, even their morale. And the best way to get that information is through a well-placed network of spies.
So it's not just about brute strength, it's about outsmarting your opponent, about having the upper hand when it comes to information.
Exactly. Now imagine you're a general, and you have a local spy embedded in the enemy's territory. The spy blends in, observes, and reports back on troop movements, supply lines, even whispers of dissent within the ranks.
It's like having eyes and ears everywhere, feeding you information your enemy doesn't even know you have.
Precisely. Sun Tzu would argue that this kind of intelligence gathering can make the difference between a decisive victory and a crushing defeat.
Okay, so we've covered planning, adaptability, psychological warfare, the strategic use of terrain, and espionage. It's like Sun Tzu is giving us a masterclass in strategy, and we're only halfway through. What else did the strategic genius have up his sleeve?
Well, he also delved into the practicalities of warfare. Resource management, logistics, choosing the right time to strike. He was adamant about avoiding protracted campaigns, wars that drag on for years and deplete both sides. He believed in ending conflicts swiftly and decisively.
That makes sense. A long, drawn-out war is a recipe for exhaustion, not just for the troops on the ground, but also for the nation as a whole.
Exactly. Sun Tzu argued that a prolonged conflict drains resources, demoralizes troops, and weakens a nation's overall strength. He advised leaders to choose their battles carefully, to strike swiftly and decisively when they have the advantage, and to always be prepared to negotiate a peace.
So it's not about blind aggression, it's about strategic timing, calculated moves, and knowing when to push forward and when to pull back.
Precisely. And this leads us to another fascinating aspect of Sun Tzu's thinking, the idea of foraging on the enemy.
Foraging on the enemy. That sounds a little intense. What does that even mean in a military context?
Sun Tzu recognized the importance of keeping your army supplied, but he also understood that long supply lines could be vulnerable. He advocated for minimizing dependence on external resources and encouraged generals to, whenever possible, live off the land they were conquering.
So it's about being resourceful, adaptable, using what's available to you to sustain your army and gain an advantage. It's a bit like the ancient world's version of reduce, reuse, recycle, but with higher stakes.
Exactly. It's about minimizing waste, maximizing efficiency, and exploiting every opportunity to gain an advantage over your opponent. Sun Tzu was a firm believer in the idea that a well-supplied army, even if outnumbered, is a force to be reckoned with.
Okay, so Sun Tzu's got us thinking about planning, adaptation, psychological warfare, using terrain to our advantage, espionage, swift action, and even sustainability in warfare. Is there anything this guy didn't think about?
What's remarkable is how he brings all these elements together into a cohesive system of thought. He understood that warfare and conflict in general is multifaceted. It's not just about physical strength, it's about intelligence, strategy, cunning, and even compassion.
Compassion. That seems a little out of place in a treatise on warfare, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Compassion. That seems a little out of place in a treatise on warfare, doesn't it?
You'd be surprised. Sun Tzu believed that a true strategist understands the human cost of conflict. He stressed the importance of winning swiftly and decisively to minimize casualties, both for your own side and even for the enemy.
So it's not about reveling in destruction.
No.
It's about achieving victory with the least amount of bloodshed possible.
Exactly.
It's almost like he's advocating for a kind of strategic empathy.
Exactly. Remember, Sun Tzu's goal was to create a guide for lasting peace and stability, not perpetual warfare. He believed that by understanding the principles of strategy, leaders could not only win wars, but also prevent them from happening in the first place.
And that's a really powerful idea. It's like he's saying that the best way to win a war is to make sure it never needs to be fought.
Precisely. And that brings us to what is perhaps Sun Tzu's most famous quote, one that encapsulates so much of his thinking. Know yourself and know your enemy, and in 100 battles, you will never be in peril.
I've heard that quote before, but I never really thought about what it meant on a deeper level. Break it down for me. What's the wisdom behind those words?
It's about understanding your own strengths and weaknesses, as well as your opponent's. It's about gathering information, anticipating moves, and knowing when to strike and when to hold back. But even more importantly, it's about self-awareness. Sun Tzu believed that if you truly know yourself, your motivations, your fears, your biases, you're less likely to make rash decisions that could lead to disaster.
It's like he's saying that the greatest battle we fight is often the one within ourselves. We need to master our own impulses, our own fears, in order to be truly effective strategists in the world.
Exactly. And that's a lesson that transcends the battlefield. It's relevant in our personal lives, our professional lives, and even in our relationships.
You know, as we've been talking about these principles, I can't help but think about how they apply to something like, say, launching a new business. You need a solid plan, you need to know your competition, you need to adapt to a constantly changing market, and you need to be resilient in the face of setbacks.
It's a perfect example. Sun Tzu's teachings aren't just for generals and military strategists. They're for anyone who's facing a challenge, pursuing a goal, or trying to navigate a complex and ever-changing landscape.
It's like he's giving us a set of tools for strategic thinking that we can apply to any situation in life.
Precisely. And that's the beauty of The Art of War. It's a timeless work that continues to resonate with readers centuries after it was written.
This deep dive into the art of war has been absolutely mind-blowing. We've covered so much ground, but I feel like we've only scratched the surface of what this ancient text has to offer.
There's always more to learn from Sun Tzu. Every time you reread The Art of War, you're bound to uncover new layers of meaning, new insights that you can apply to your own life.
For our listeners who are feeling inspired to unleash their inner strategist, what's one key takeaway you hope they'll carry with them from this conversation?
Remember this. Strategy isn't just about winning, it's about making the wisest choices, whether you're facing a formidable opponent or simply navigating the complexities of your own life.
That's a perfect note to end on. Know yourself, know your enemy, make wise choices, and never underestimate the power of strategic thinking. This has been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into Sun Tzu's The Art of War. And if you're new to Dreamer Space and love this deep dive, hit that subscribe button and join our community of fellow explorers. Until next time, keep dreaming big.